The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Quartz Hill, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878, but it wasn't what made Theresa Farrow's heart stop. It was the wanted poster flapping in the wind outside the sheriff's office, bearing her face, or what was supposed to be her face. The artist's rendition looked nothing like her, thank the heavens, but the name printed beneath it was unmistakably hers. $5,000 for information leading to her capture, dead or alive. The crime, murder. Theresa pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, tucking a stray strand of auburn hair beneath her bonnet. The small town of Quartz Hill had seemed the perfect place to disappear, far from Chicago and the nightmare she'd left behind. 3 weeks of peace was all she'd managed before her past found her. She hurried down the boardwalk, eyes downcast, bumping into a tall figure. Strong hands steadied her shoulders. "Whoa there, madam." His voice was deep, tinged with a slight southern drawl. Theresa looked up into the face of Sheriff Samuel Drake, the man who had welcomed her to town when she arrived on the stagecoach claiming to be a seamstress seeking work. His eyes, the color of faded denim, crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Today, there was no smile. "Miss Farrow," he said, tipping his hat, "you seem in an awful hurry this morning. Just late for work, Sheriff." She attempted a smile, but her eyes betrayed her, flickering toward the wanted poster. The sheriff followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Interesting thing about that poster," he said quietly. "Came in yesterday's mail, along with a letter from the Chicago authorities." Theresa's mouth went dry. "I should really be going. I think you'd better come inside." It wasn't a request. The sheriff's office was sparse but tidy. A desk, 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and 3 jail cells along the back wall, all empty. Sheriff Drake closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. "I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, Miss Farrow. I've learned to trust my instincts about people." He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "And my instincts tell me you're not a killer." Tears sprang to her eyes. "I didn't do it," she whispered, "but no one would believe me." "Why don't you start at the beginning?" Theresa took a deep breath. "I worked as a lady's companion to Mrs. Eleanor Blackwell in Chicago. Her husband, Victor, was a wealthy businessman, cruel and controlling. Eleanor, she confided in me about his abuses. One night, I heard shouting, then a gunshot. I found Eleanor standing over Victor's body, the gun in her hand. She begged me to run to take the blame. She said her children would be left with nothing if she went to prison." "And you agreed?" Sheriff Drake's eyebrow raised. "No, I refused. But when the police arrived, Eleanor told them I had been obsessed with Victor, that I had killed him in a jealous rage when he rejected me. Her brother is the police commissioner. Within hours, I was the only suspect, and Eleanor was the grieving widow. I fled that night." The sheriff was silent for a long moment, studying her face. "That's quite a story. It's the truth." He walked to the window, looking out at the town coming to life in the morning sun. "Truth's a funny thing in these parts. Sometimes it matters less than what people believe." He turned back to her. "That poster, the likeness is poor. Could be any woman with auburn hair." Hope fluttered in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I haven't seen anyone matching that description come through Quartz Hill." He picked up the wanted poster from his desk and held it to the flame of a lamp until it caught fire, then dropped it into the empty washbasin, watching it curl into ash. "Why would you do that?" she asked, bewildered. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Especially those who never got a first one." His eyes met hers. "But Miss Farrow, if you're staying in my town, I need to know you're telling the truth." "I am," she said, holding his gaze steadily. "Then you have nothing to worry about." He opened the door. "For now, I suggest you continue your life here, but be careful. That poster may be gone, but others will come." As Theresa stepped back onto the boardwalk, the weight on her shoulders felt slightly lighter. She had an ally, but for how long? The town was fully awake now, the general store open for business, the saloon being swept out, and the blacksmith's hammer ringing against his anvil. Theresa hurried to Mrs. Wilson's dress shop where she had found employment upon her arrival. The older woman had been grateful for Theresa's skilled needlework and elegant designs, skills honed during her years in Chicago society. "There you are, dear," Mrs. Wilson said as the bell above the door jingled. "We have a fitting with Mrs. Henderson at 10, and that order for the Peterson wedding needs finishing by tomorrow. The routine of work was a blessing, each stitch a step further from her past. As Theresa's fingers moved deftly through the delicate fabrics, she found herself thinking of Sheriff Drake's kind eyes, the way he had destroyed the poster without hesitation. The day passed quickly, and as dusk fell, Theresa made her way to her small, rented room above the bakery. The scent of fresh bread still lingered in the air as she climbed the back stairs. She lit the lamp and froze. Her room had been searched subtly but unmistakably. The drawer containing her meager possessions was closed but not quite aligned. The Bible she kept by her bed was at a different angle. Heart racing, she checked her most precious possession, a small portrait miniature of her mother, hidden in a false bottom of her hairbrush. It was still there, but the intrusion left her shaken. Someone knew, or at least suspected. A knock at her door made her jump. She approached cautiously, pressing her ear to the wood. "Miss Farrow, it's Sheriff Drake." She opened the door, relief washing over her. "Sheriff." His expression was grave. "May I come in?" Once inside, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "Someone's been asking questions about you. A private detective from back east arrived on today's stage. Says he's looking for his client's long-lost sister, but I don't believe him for a minute." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd ask around. He's staying at the hotel." The sheriff's eyes scanned the room, noticing the slight disarray. "He's been here." "Yes," Theresa whispered. "What should I do?" "Leave, tonight." The sheriff reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "My brother owns a ranch about 50 miles north of here. I've written him, asking if he can use a housekeeper. He's a good man, runs the place alone since his wife passed 2 years ago." He handed her the paper. "The stagecoach doesn't go that way, but I can take you." "You would do that for me? Why?" she asked, bewildered by his kindness. "Because I've spent my life upholding the law, but I've seen enough to know justice and law aren't always the same thing." His eyes softened. "And maybe because in the 3 weeks you've been here, you've brought something to this town that's been missing for a long time." "What's that?" "Grace," he said simply. 2 hours later, Theresa sat beside Sheriff Drake on a wagon heading north under a canopy of stars. Her few possessions were packed in a small trunk in the back. They traveled in comfortable silence, the rhythmic clop of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels the only sounds. "Tell me about your brother," Theresa said eventually. "Seth's 4 years younger than me, fought in the war when he was barely old enough to hold a rifle, came back changed like most did, found peace in ranching though. He raises horses, some of the finest in the territory." "And you became a sheriff instead," Samuel chuckled. "Seems I was always the one breaking up fights, even as a boy. Figured I might as well get paid for it." As the night deepened, Theresa found herself sharing more of her own story, her childhood in Boston, her father's death that left the family destitute, the years working as a companion to wealthy women. Samuel listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. "You never married?" she asked him as dawn broke over the eastern horizon. "Almost. Her name was Catherine. Typhoid took her a month before the wedding." His voice was matter of fact, but Theresa heard the old pain beneath it. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago," he smiled slightly. "What about you?" "No suitor captured your heart in Chicago. Working as a companion doesn't leave much room for courting, and after seeing what Alina endured." She shook her head. "Marriage seemed more risk than reward." "Not all men are like Victor Blackwell," Samuel said quietly. "I know that now," she replied, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away. They reached the Drake Ranch by mid-morning. It was larger than Theresa had expected, a sturdy 2-story house surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. The landscape was different from Quartz Hill, more rugged with mountains rising in the distance and a creek winding through the property. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall like Samuel but leaner, with the same dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. His face was weathered from years in the sun, and he walked with a slight limp. "Didn't expect you for another day," Seth Drake called out as they pulled up to the house. "Had to move up our plans," Samuel replied, hopping down from the wagon and helping Theresa descend. "Seth, this is Miss Theresa Farrow. Miss Farrow, my brother Seth." Seth Drake's handshake was firm, his appraisal direct but not unkind. Samuel's letter said you need a place to stay. He didn't say you were so young. I'm 26, Mr. Drake, and I've been working since I was 15. I assure you I'm capable. A smile touched his lips. I don't doubt it. Come inside and we'll get you settled. The house was well built but showed signs of bachelor living, functional rather than comfortable, clean but Spartan. The front room had a stone fireplace, a desk covered in papers, and bookshelves filled with volumes on horse breeding and Western history. The kitchen was large but underused, with a cast iron stove and a table that could seat 8 but had only one chair pulled up to it. You'll have the room upstairs at the end of the hall, Seth said, leading them up a narrow staircase. Used to be our parents' best view in the house. The bedroom was simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and washstand, but the window looked out over the creek and mountains beyond. It was the most peaceful scene Theresa had witnessed in months. It's perfect, she said. I'll bring your trunk up, Samuel offered, leaving Theresa alone with Seth. My brother says you're in some kind of trouble, Seth said bluntly once Samuel was out of earshot. Theresa tensed. Did he tell you what kind? No, said it wasn't his story to tell. Seth leaned against the doorframe. I don't need to know the details. Samuel's judgment is good enough for me, but this is my home and I need to know if trouble's following you here. It might, she admitted. I hope not, but I can't promise. Seth nodded slowly. Fair enough. Just know that out here we stand our ground. Samuel returned with her trunk, setting it at the foot of the bed. I should head back before that detective gets suspicious. You're leaving already. Theresa couldn't hide her disappointment. Best if I'm in town when he starts asking more questions. He hesitated. I'll come check on you when I can. Seth excused himself, leaving them alone. Thank you, Theresa said softly. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. Live your life. That'll be payment enough. Samuel took her hand briefly, his touch warm and reassuring. Seth seems gruff, but he's a good man. You'll be safe here. After he left, Theresa stood at the window watching until the wagon was just a speck on the horizon. She unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. The room still held traces of its previous occupants: a faded quilt, handmade curtains, a small painting of wildflowers on the wall. That evening, she prepared dinner from the supplies in the kitchen, a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. Seth ate without comment, but he cleaned his plate and accepted a second helping. Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal, he said finally. Usually just throw something together or eat at the bunkhouse with the hands. You have ranch hands. Theresa hadn't seen anyone else around the property. 3, they stay in the bunkhouse near the south pasture. They're good workers, keep to themselves mostly. He took a sip of coffee. They know not to come to the main house unless invited. The days fell into a pattern. Theresa rose early, prepared breakfast, then spent the morning cleaning and organizing the long-neglected house. Seth was out from dawn until dusk, working with the horses or managing the ranch's business affairs. They would share dinner in the evening, their conversation gradually becoming less stilted as they grew accustomed to each other's presence. 2 weeks after her arrival, Theresa was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her first fear was that the detective had found her, but as the rider came into view, her heart lifted. Samuel Drake dismounted his horse with a smile that reached his eyes. Miss Farrow. You're looking well. Indeed, the fresh air and regular meals had brought color to her cheeks and a healthier fullness to her figure, which had grown thin during her weeks of flight. Sheriff Drake, what a pleasant surprise. She couldn't help returning his smile. Seth is out checking the north fence line, but he should be back soon. Actually, I came to see you, he said, removing his hat, and to bring you this. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. It's not much, just some ribbons and thread from Mrs. Wilson's shop. Thought you might like having something to keep your hands busy. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. That's very kind. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. They sat on the porch, the late September sun warming the air despite the hint of autumn crispness. Samuel updated her on the happenings in Quartz Hill. The detective had stayed for 5 days, asking questions and showing people a clearer photograph of Theresa, one that would have left no doubt of her identity had anyone recognized her. He left disappointed, Samuel said. But I don't think he's given up. Men like that get paid to be persistent. And Mrs. Wilson, the dress shop, hired a girl from Tucson to replace you, not nearly as skilled from what I hear. His eyes held hers. You're missed. The simple statement warmed her more than the coffee. I miss it too, the work, the people. Even with everything, those were good weeks. How are you getting along with Seth? Samuel asked, changing the subject. Better than I expected. He's quiet but kind in his way. The house needed a woman's touch desperately. She smiled. I found 3 mismatched sets of dishes and not a single proper tablecloth. Samuel laughed. That sounds like Seth. After Rebecca died, he just existed, didn't really live. He mentioned her once, said she was a good woman. Theresa shook her head. Men can be so inadequate with words. Some of us maybe. Samuel's voice softened. I think about you every day, Theresa, wonder if you're safe, if you're happy. The use of her first name sent a pleasant shiver through her. I'm safer than I've been in months, she answered honestly. Happiness feels like a luxury I haven't earned yet. Everyone deserves happiness. The sound of approaching hooves ended their conversation. Seth rode into the yard, surprise and then understanding crossing his face when he saw his brother. Didn't know you were coming, he said, dismounting. Thought I'd check on our guest, Samuel replied easily, and bring news from town. The 3 of them shared dinner that evening, the brothers exchanging stories and good-natured barbs that gave Theresa a glimpse of their childhood bond. As night fell, Samuel reluctantly prepared to leave. It's a long ride back, Seth protested. Stay the night, your old room's still there. Samuel glanced at Theresa, who nodded her agreement. If you're sure I'm not imposing. That night, unable to sleep, Theresa slipped downstairs for a glass of water. She found Samuel sitting by the dying embers in the fireplace, a book open in his lap. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, looking up. Too many thoughts. She sat in the chair opposite him. What are you reading? He showed her the cover, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Poetry helps quiet my mind. Would you read some? She asked, surprising herself with the request. Samuel's deep voice filled the quiet room as he read by the faint light of the fire. Whitman's words of nature and humanity, of connection and solitude, washed over Theresa like a balm. When he finished, they sat in comfortable silence. I should go back upstairs, she said finally, though reluctantly. Theresa, Samuel said as she stood, I'll come back in 2 weeks if that's all right. I'd like that very much. True to his word, Samuel returned 2 weeks later and then again 2 weeks after that. Each visit was ostensibly to check on her safety and bring news, but they both knew it was more than that. October turned to November, and with it came cooler nights and shorter days. During one visit, he brought her a stack of newspapers and letters that had arrived for her at Mrs. Wilson's shop. Among them was a letter from a former colleague in Chicago with startling news. Eleanor Blackwell had confessed to her husband's murder. The guilt had apparently consumed her, and with her brother's influence, she had received a sentence of just 5 years in prison rather than hanging. I'm free, Theresa whispered, showing Samuel the letter. Truly free. You could go anywhere now, Samuel said, his expression careful. Return to Chicago or Boston, perhaps. I have no desire to go back east, she replied, meeting his eyes steadily. My life is here now. As winter approached, Seth asked Theresa to accompany him to a horse auction in a neighboring town. The outing was her first beyond the ranch since her arrival, and despite her nervousness, she enjoyed the change of scenery and the bustling energy of the auction. You have a good eye, Seth commented as she pointed out a mare he had overlooked. Strong hindquarters, good temperament. My father raised carriage horses, she explained. I spent more time in stables than parlors as a child, much to my mother's dismay. Seth bought the mare, along with 2 other horses he'd had his eye on. As they prepared to leave, a man approached them, his gaze fixed on Theresa. Pardon me, madam, but have we met before? You look awfully familiar. Theresa's heart raced, but Seth stepped smoothly between them. My sister-in-law is from California, sir, just visiting for the season, if you'll excuse us. On the ride home, Theresa thanked him for the quick thinking. Sister-in-law, Seth shrugged, seemed the simplest explanation. After a pause, he added, though I suspect my brother wouldn't mind making it the truth someday. Theresa flushed. He's been very kind. Samuel's always been kind. But he looks at you differently than he's looked at anyone since Catherine. Seth glanced at her. And you look at him the same way. December brought the first snow, turning the ranch into a winter wonderland. Samuel's visits became less frequent due to the weather, but he arrived 3 days before Christmas with a small fir tree tied to his saddle and saddlebags full of small gifts and holiday treats from town. "Thought we might have a proper Christmas," he explained as Seth helped him carry the tree inside. That evening, the three of them decorated the tree with paper ornaments Theresa had secretly crafted, strung popcorn, and small carved wooden stars Seth produced from a box that had belonged to their mother. The simple celebration filled the house with more warmth and joy than it had seen in years. On Christmas Eve, after Seth had retired to bed, Samuel and Theresa sat before the fire, the room illuminated only by the flames and the candles on the tree. "I have something for you," Samuel said, reaching into his pocket. He handed her a small package wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a locket, simple but elegant, with a floral pattern engraved on its surface. When she opened it, she found a tiny painted portrait of a mountain landscape similar to the view from her bedroom window. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I had it commissioned from an artist passing through Quartz Hill. Thought you might like a piece of this place to keep with you, no matter where life takes you." "Samuel," she said softly, "I don't want to be anywhere else." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "When I first saw you in town, something told me you were important. I didn't know how much until you were gone." "I thought about you every day," she admitted. "Your kindness when you had every reason to turn me in, your belief in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." "Theresa," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I know it hasn't been that long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you." The words she had feared for so long now filled her with joy. "I love you too." Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Samuel's eyes were bright in the firelight. "I don't expect an answer now, but I hope someday you might consider becoming my wife." "You don't need to wait for someday," she replied. "My answer is yes." Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. When they announced their engagement to Seth over breakfast, he smiled broadly for the first time since Theresa had met him. "About time," he said, reaching across the table to shake his brother's hand. "Congratulations to you both." In January, Samuel resigned his position as sheriff of Quartz Hill, recommending his deputy for the job. He moved to the ranch, taking over the small cabin near the main house that had once been the foreman's quarters. Though they were engaged, propriety dictated they maintain separate residences until the wedding. The announcement of their engagement was published in the Quartz Hill Gazette, a bold move that proclaimed to the world that Theresa Farrow had nothing to hide. No detectives came looking, no wanted posters appeared. Her past was truly behind her. They were married on a clear day in early April when the wildflowers were beginning to carpet the meadows around the ranch. The ceremony was small but joyful, held beneath an arch of early roses in the garden Theresa had started. Seth stood as Samuel's best man, and Mrs. Wilson had traveled from Quartz Hill to support Theresa. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, promises of love, trust, and partnership that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranch hands. As Samuel slipped a gold band onto her finger, Theresa felt the final pieces of her life falling perfectly into place. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing in the yard. As dusk fell, Theresa found herself standing slightly apart from the festivities, taking in the scene of happiness that seemed almost unbelievable after the fear and loneliness of the past year. Samuel appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy Mrs. Drake, more than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into him. "It feels like a dream. If it is, I don't want to wake up." He kissed her temple. "I have something to show you." He led her away from the celebration toward the creek that ran behind the house. There, nestled among the cottonwoods, stood a small cabin she had never noticed before, light glowing from its windows. "What is this?" she asked as they approached. "Our home," Samuel replied. "Seth and the Hands built it while I was finishing up in Quartz Hill. I wanted us to have our own place, close enough to help with the ranch, but," he smiled, "private." The cabin was simple but perfect: a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with new copper pots hanging from the ceiling, and a bedroom with a handmade quilt spread across the bed. Wildflowers in glass jars adorned every surface, filling the space with their sweet scent. "It's wonderful," Theresa breathed, turning to embrace her husband. "Our own home, our own life," he corrected gently. "No more running, no more fear." As spring turned to summer, Theresa and Samuel settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked alongside Seth on the ranch, with Theresa taking over the bookkeeping and correspondence while also maintaining both households. Her garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table and flowers for their home. Samuel found his calling in horse breeding, combining his brother's practical knowledge with his own keen sense of horseflesh. Together, they began to develop a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as California. On warm evenings, Samuel would read to Theresa on the porch of their cabin poetry and adventure stories, and sometimes the letters they received from friends in Quartz Hill. They talked about everything: their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. And in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other in ways that made their bond even stronger. In late July, a letter arrived from Chicago. Eleanor Blackwell had died in prison, but before her death, she had signed a full confession exonerating Theresa completely. Enclosed was a bank draft for a considerable sum: Eleanor's attempt at restitution. "What will you do with it?" Samuel asked as they sat by the creek that evening, the letter in Theresa's hands. "I'm not sure it feels right to keep it," she said thoughtfully. "But perhaps we could use it to help others who need a second chance." She looked up at him. "Maybe a school. There are so many children on the surrounding ranches who have to travel too far for education." Samuel smiled. "A school would be perfect. We could build it halfway between here and Quartz Hill, make it accessible to more families." By autumn, the plans for the school were underway, with land purchased and a teacher hired from Denver. The community embraced the project enthusiastically, and construction began before the first snowfall. As winter approached again, Theresa discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled their small home with even greater joy, and Samuel's protective instincts intensified in the most endearing ways. "You shouldn't be lifting that," he would say, taking a basket of laundry from her hands. "I'm pregnant, Samuel, not made of glass," she would reply, but she loved his concern. Seth was equally excited about the prospect of becoming an uncle. He began carving a cradle in his spare time, working on it secretly in the barn until it was ready to present at Christmas, a beautiful piece crafted from the wood of an old oak tree that had stood on the ranch since his grandfather's time. "It's magnificent," Theresa exclaimed when he unveiled it. "Our child will treasure it." As her pregnancy progressed, Theresa found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place and these people. From the terror of that night in Chicago to the peace of her life now seemed an impossible transformation, yet here she was. One evening in early spring, as they sat before the fire in their cabin, Samuel brought out a folded paper from his desk drawer. "I've kept this all this time," he said, handing it to her. It was the wanted poster, the one he had pretended to burn in his office that day in Quartz Hill. The artist's rendition was indeed poor, a generic face with Theresa's name beneath it. "Why did you keep it?" she asked. "At first, as evidence in case I needed to protect you, later as a reminder of how we met." He smiled. "And how sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings." Theresa studied the crude drawing. "I'm not the woman in that picture," she confessed, running her fingers over the faded ink. Samuel took her hand, his eyes warm with love. "You're better in person." Their son was born on a perfect day in May 1879, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Thomas, after Theresa's father, with Seth as his middle name in honor of his uncle. The ranch thrived under the care of the Drake brothers, its reputation growing with each passing season. The school opened its doors that autumn, with 15 students from the surrounding areas attending the first classes. Theresa, though busy with motherhood, found time to teach a weekly lesson on literature and poetry. As little Thomas grew, so did their family's happiness. The fear that had once defined Theresa's life faded into a distant memory, replaced by the daily joys of watching her son discover the world, of building a life with Samuel, of creating a community around them. On their second wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Theresa with a proper family portrait of the three of them, painted by an artist he had commissioned from Tucson. Unlike the crude wanted poster that had once threatened to define her, this image captured the truth of who she was: a beloved wife, a devoted mother, a woman who had found her place in the world. "Now this," Samuel said as they admired the painting hanging above their fireplace, "is the real Theresa Drake." "It is," she agreed, leaning against his shoulder as Thomas played at their feet, "and I've never been happier to be her." The years that followed brought more children: a daughter, Sarah, born in 1881, and another son, James, in 1884. The ranch expanded, the school flourished, and the Drake family became a cornerstone of the community that grew around them. On warm summer evenings, they would gather on the porch of their cabin, no longer small, as rooms had been added to accommodate their growing family. Samuel would still read poetry aloud, his voice carrying on the gentle breeze as the children listened with varying degrees of attention, and Theresa stitched or simply enjoyed the moment. Sometimes, in the quiet hours after the children were asleep, Theresa would take out the locket Samuel had given her that first Christmas, opening it to gaze at the tiny painted landscape inside. It reminded her of how far she had come, of the journey that had led her to this life that once seemed impossible. "Any regrets?" Samuel asked her one such evening, finding her lost in thought. "Not one," she replied, closing the locket and turning to the man who had saved her in more ways than he would ever know. "Every step, even the painful ones, brought me here, to you, to our family, to this life." Samuel took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm as he had done countless times over the years, the gesture still sending the same warmth through her heart. "And what a beautiful life it is." As they stood together looking out at the ranch, at the land that had become their home, Theresa knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, not running, not hiding, but standing proud in the full light of day, loved for exactly who she was. The wanted poster was long forgotten, replaced by the truth of the woman she had become: not a fugitive or a victim, but a woman who had found the courage to build a new life, to love deeply, and to be loved in return. Better than any artist's rendition could ever capture, better in person, better in the truth of her life lived fully and without fear. And that, Theresa Drake knew, was the most perfect ending to her story she could have ever imagined.